see how things have changed since in the last 20 or 30 some years has been great. Looking at how does innovation happen in the industry, how does regulatory systems cross with innovation and enhance or prohibit them. I think there's a lot of opportunity in this industry, and great opportunity over here. I mean, in America, we don't even know what mobile money is. I never used mobile money till, well, 3 years ago. Because we don't have it. It doesn't exist in that world. So the innovation capability in markets like this where there's not fixed wired systems, copper wire systems or now fiber systems is great. How do we catch up? How do we move forward? And how do we advance faster than the rest of the world and use this? So thank you guys for being on the panel. We really appreciate it. And I think I'll hand it over to Haruna. One last comment, just so you know, James represents Raxio, who's also one of our members. Just as a reminder, and that they're going to be opening their data center pretty soon. I hope you say something about that. So, all right, thank you guys, Haruna.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you everyone. Anne, you saying something?
Yes, I was saying Ziad will give a few remarks. Just
go ahead.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry, Ziad.
Thank you, Anne. Anne, as usual, sterling organization. Very often, I think it's not actually AmCham, but it's AmCham, you know? You're behind every successful activity in there, you know? So Mike, you might want to rebrand a little sometimes, you know?
Sure.
And Mike, yes, we are members, and I think Anne said it. We are a member of the Vice President, what do you call it, club or circle? It's, I think there's no space in the President one, so I don't know when you're going to make one available for us. But let me just butt in, and, you know, in terms of why we are here around the table. So thank you for the panelists. Thank you, Irene, for being with us today. Thank you, James. You know, and when we started talking about the IoT with AmCham, you know, about this webinar, I thought to myself that my friends from AmCham are not inviting me for the T part of IoT. You know, we're not going to talk about things. I think they wanted me to talk more about the I, you know, the internet side of it, which is, you know, very exciting. But at the same time, I feel it can be a bit dangerous. So before we dive into, you know, technology, connectivity, before we dive into affordability of connectivity, coverage, etc., I thought it would be interesting, you know, just set of remarks that I would like your input on what we are talking about. What is IoT? And very frankly, for me, IoT is a bit, you know, it's exciting and disappointing at the same time. Because every time I hear about IoT, I mostly hear about IoT from IoT providers. And they all talk to me about change and changing the world. And when you look at it into details, you know, when people talk about change, it's mostly the transformation of businesses. You know, it's business process oriented. It's the side from the business, you know, how the business see IoT. It's for us looking at, you know, filling our data centers with more servers to service the IoT networks, if you like. I have seen very little about, you know, how IoT, from my perspective, you know, can help elevate daily challenges. You know, what does it do for the individual on the street? You know, we've all heard about projects, you know, high yield crops, using monitoring water resources, body network sensors, and all these kind of things. But we cannot talk about IoT without looking, you know, with only looking at the connectivity side of it. There are a plethora of other, you know, issues that also need to be solved. You know, how reliable these sensors are. You know, privacy and security. You know, are they hackable? You know, if I put a sensor on my body or in my home, who else can look at it? And very frankly, you know, these kind of social network, social distribution of massive amount of sensors and smart devices need a proper regulatory framework. So this is why I'm very happy and very excited Irene is amongst us today, right? And then of course, you know, we have the connectivity and you know, affordability part of it. And when people talk to me about, you know, is connectivity affordable in Africa? I always say before affordability, you know, we need connectivity, you need coverage, you need stable, reliable, scalable coverage, you know, and then we talk how affordable it is. And, you know, I'm very happy, and, you know, my CCO is on board here as well. He can add a few words. We have done tremendous work at Africell. We have worked very, very hard to ensure that, you know, whatever we take to the market, we take it in an affordable way. You know, we give back to the community the opportunity to be online, because personally, I fundamentally believe this is one area, you know, connectivity, one area to bring people out of poverty. You know, you enable them, and then you know, you let the imagination of these people take this enabling, you know, to the sky. So yes, for me, IoT is, like people say, a disruptive technology. It is a new wave, but I don't want, you know, as a service provider to ride this wave on the basis of technology. I don't want to ride it on the basis I can put service in the back end, you know, and think about it from a technology point of view. I would like the panel's views on how we look at it from a humanitarian point of view. What does it bring to the, you know, to the Mr. and the Mrs. On the street? You know, how does it help the elderlies? How does it help people creating more wealth through their own work? So, and these are some of the ideas I have been toying with, you know, when we sat down and we discussed the webinar. And I would like to leave the rest to the panel, to the floor. Back to you, Anne. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ziad, for those remarks. Haruna, I hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you, Ziad. James, I've known you for a while. Irene, thank you for being on this call. And I've listened to what Ziad has said, and it's quite interesting. We ask ourselves, what is IoT? From a layman's perspective, this is the ability to extend the power of the internet beyond computers and smartphones. From a telecom perspective, from global players, this has the ability to drastically change our lives. I'd like from Irene's perspective, I'll start with Irene. What do you regard as the most interesting use for IoT?
Thank you, Haruna, and good evening to everybody. Yes, Ziad, of course, challenged us first about the whole IoT for the common person. You know, I tend to like simplifying these things, and to me, it's just about adding the technology to a device, a physical device, so that it can communicate on the internet. So you want an ordinary physical device to be able to connect to the internet. Okay. Now, when you look at it that way, that opens up a host of opportunities. Last year, I was privileged to see some of the work done by students from Makerere University, where they were coming up with the use of IoTs to assist persons who are blind, so that they are able to have this reflective jacket and through the IoTs be guided rather than the stick. So it is about not the technology, but how you look at using that technology to address your ordinary everyday challenges. And that's the way we need to take. I like the fact that Ziad says he doesn't want to look at it as just making money. We need, as a country, to look at how do we take these technologies, not for the fuss of it, but to use them to address our local challenges, our local context. Yes, we want to do the smart cities, and I've always said, you know, people make it seem like that's so far off. I'm so happy to see KCCA embrace that, to say what aspects can be made smart within Kampala. Simple things like even the traffic lights. You know, of course, we have the challenge of the human factor where we don't seem to want development among us, that we instead challenge the development by, for example, stealing the SIM cards they put there for such facilities. So there are very many things in our everyday life that we can actually harness these IoTs to address. And things like, you can imagine how many of us complain about traffic. Imagine if we had that real-time information notice boards to tell you that, you know, in 500 meters, or okay, maybe 500 meters is too short, but, you know, ahead there's traffic. that way it warns you in advance that, and you plan an alternative route before having to sit into this very bad traffic. So I feel like it's about us innovating rather than looking at the technology as a foreign thing coming to us. Yes, maybe in our case, we're not yet in the driverless cars, doesn't make sense. Even for the Chira bus that is electrical, that took many by surprise because we used to look at it as a luxury thing. Now we are seeing that maybe, you know, the electric car does have some sense here. So in the same context, we need to see how do we bring this technology that is just about sensors, about controlling things remotely, about being able to, you know, manage all these and bring automation. For example, one of the key sellers these days is factories. We're not saying we want to kill the jobs, but how do we complement the existing manpower to speed up and get more gains out of our factories so that, yes, when we talk about wanting to do fourth industrial revolution, let us feel it. How do we bring it to our local context? Yes, we have adopted machinery, but we don't have to go through all those first, second, third, fourth. We can jump all the way to the fourth. We don't have to say we were left behind in the second, we're still on catch up. No, we can leapfrog. So looking at our innovators, looking and bringing together people to say, you know, maybe if I had a computer that could do this to that, and then the technical people come in to say, okay, yes, maybe if I put this intelligence in this and in this, we will have that done. So I just thought I'd put that there. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. James is building a data center, and this is very relative to him. James, do you have anything to say to us about that?
Yeah, first of all, thank you. And thank you guys for the invite. Well, first of all, I think Ziad's thrown a bunch of curveballs in the air. I'll try and dodge those for starters. And then Irene says she likes to simplify things. I think I'll try and complicate them so that we can get a good balance on this topic. So I actually want to give more input towards the technical side of IoT, which basically is, I think the big challenge we tend to run into is when people think of IoT on its own, but not think about what makes it happen and how it builds up. And I want to just shed some light on a couple of key areas where I think IoT needs to, first of all, be, that you need to build for the IoT to work, and then also just throw a bit of insight in my view about the value I think IoT basically adds to us in the different areas. So first of all, I think IoT is one of those things that requires a lot of computing power, which is not necessarily readily available every time. So if you start by building a solution from the end, which is just the IoT to work in terms of the devices, enable them to be able to communicate without computing power in the back, you will struggle with getting the right results. So I think there's a need to work on planning to build the right computing power to be able to drive the applications, which in turn can make these devices of some importance. If the device and applications cannot be supported at the back end, then you really can't get any desired results from IoT in terms of actual functionality or positive results. And then we have to think about the connectivity, which obviously Ziad mentioned in his opening remarks. But I think that one of the big issues we have is that we don't have sufficient connectivity to drive these applications. Yes, there is a strong effort by the MNOs, ISPs, and carriers to try and catch up with the demands and the requirements. But I think we can all testify that when work from home and teaching kids at home kicked in our lives, come in March and became no longer a luxury but a necessity, you've had cases where these kind of Zoom calls are going to be a challenge because of the audio quality. You see kids complaining, and then of course the most important person right now has become the internet service provider for every home. When you wake up in the morning, everyone runs off into their rooms with the different devices to study, to work, and to do all sorts of things. So the need for sufficient connectivity is become more apparent now because people now have been forced work remotely and to study remotely and operate remotely. So there is a significant amount of effort that needs to be put in expanding connectivity. And of course, the regulator has a big role to play around things like frequencies and spectrum that they can extend to providers to be able to give the consumer a good experience. So you'll find no more cases, and if it's a normal conversation lately, of people bashing ISPs and telcos because the performance of the internet doesn't meet their requirements now, because they're using the links now. Other than connectivity and computing power, of course, there is a need to consider the security. This has become very apparent with learning from home, because now the kids have been thrown onto the internet without any kind of safety measures. So this is the downside that comes, of course, with IoT. You open up your home, you open up your office, you open up your life and your devices and your cars to the internet world. And very few people think about the security before they implement some of these solutions. So cybersecurity is a very critical role, a very critical role to play in IoT. And this is something that should be considered heavily. But most importantly, and this really works for the business community, is being able to use big data or big data analytics to make important decisions with the data that comes out of IoT. So everyone right now is generating a lot of traffic, a lot of packets with their devices. As we are right now on our PC, we're building digital footprints. We're generating a lot of data with our smartphones, because everyone these days is jogging. I always see Haruna jogging around the neighborhood, and Mike with their smartphones and making sure they keep data of how their performance was. Smart gates that you enable every day when you're going to sleep, and your smart fences, TVs, Netflix, all these different things. There's a lot of data being generated, but are we actually doing any analytics to see how we can use this data to improve either our business decisions or our personal decisions? So those are the 4 areas that I think are important to consider with IoT. And in terms of where I think it's the application comes in, I think it's across the board. I think smart homes, smart cities, smart farming, smart health, all these different things, IoT driven. And we're living with them. We are just not really aware that we are. And I think there's a need for people to be sensitized, to understand that the IoT is really here, it's already with you. I don't think that the 4th industrial revolution is miles away. It doesn't have to be artificial reality or augmented reality, or artificial intelligence to tell you that that's IoT, but because you're already living this. So I think, if we enable the chain that I've mentioned to really be planned and come out strongly, then the end result in terms of the applications and the devices will naturally start to work.
Thanks, James, for the insight. James, you talked of connectivity, which is a good thing, and there's need for more bandwidth. I see so many kids are studying from home now. Ziad, on the ISP side, what solutions are you working with to enable to address this solution and these expectations as Africell?
Let me restart my video. Thank you, Haruna. James, I like you complicating things, because it is not an easy discussion. The easiest presentation for me would be today to stand in front of some investors and put a business case for IoT. The business case exists, but I must also second what Irene was saying about how does it benefit the community. And the question of connectivity is really at the heart of this. And I think also, funny enough, the pandemic has taught us a lot over the last few months, right? And a lot of people are talking about remote learning, as James reminded us a minute ago. And when they come to me and say, what kind of solutions do we have? For me, the problem is not, or the main issue is not remote learning. Remote learning has been here for years. The issue today in remote learning is mass remote learning. Earlier on, university had a few students connecting remotely to benefit of some specific know-how which was not geographically available. Now the need for remote learning is, you need to put 1,500 or 2,000 students, on the remote learning platform immediately, and the scalability doesn't exist. It doesn't exist, as James reminded us, on the server side, in the back office. And very often it doesn't exist on the connectivity side, specifically in some of our regions in Africa. The interesting thing is, you have also to, I hope, Irene will second me on this. It's also about, the drive of a good regulator ensuring that connectivity is available, as an umbrella coverage over people and landmass. And, there is a drive today in terms of encouraging the operators in Uganda. Let's focus on Uganda for a minute, from the regulator, from the authorities in charge, to not enforce, but to entice the operators to go and develop this coverage. Sometimes it's a difficult value proposition to take coverage to the, to the far end, to the edge of a country, where, you put a site for connectivity, it costs you thousands of dollars, and then it only brings a few $100 every month. So, the balance sheet doesn't always look good when you look at it from, expanding coverage point of view. But typically, as our, other stakeholders and players in the industry in Uganda, Africell is planning further development and deployment of, high-speed broadband mobile data networks. And then the way we look at it actually is we're looking at important places in the country, whether they are urban or suburban areas, where we have bandwidth available. And the way we look at it actually is through very much technology optimization, carrier aggregation, frequency usage. I think James mentioned that this is one important area of, mobile data availability. So, we are lucky to have, and, our friends from UCC support us on this, is we have a set of frequencies that enable me to hit speeds of 70, 80, 90 megabit per second on the 4G aggregated network, if you like, right? Theoretical speeds, up to 300 megabytes per second. But in reality, we are aiming to be in the 70 to 80, see 100 megabit Mbps delivery. So we can be part of the infrastructure that, eventually on top of it, we can layer services and IoT. James is right, IoT is here and it is here to stay. And, but it's here in a fragmented way. I buy a smart camera, I have a smart TV, my fridge will tell me one day I need a liter of milk. The fragmentation is here. And this is really how new technology usually starts. It starts as disruptive. It starts as small flames everywhere before the bushfire takes. And what we really need to be ready for is this bushfire effect, when, it demultiplies, it scales. And then, everybody wants a smart camera. All cities are smart cities. We have sensors over red lights to indicate, 600 meter or 900 meter before I arrive at the red light that it is green and I need to adapt my speed. So, I regulate the flow of people in and out of cities. I regulate the inflow of clean water and the outflow of sewage water. All this is potential application domains for Internet of Things, right? And, at our level, we're working in good coordination and intelligence with the regulator and the ministries, that are in charge, to make sure that the next wave of technology deployment, also enables or also is a jumping platform for this kind of deployment. We have spoken to UCC maybe 8 months ago about 5G deployment. In our plan, we have a plan to, in our development of the network, we have a plan to put a few 5G sites as test sites to effectively test some of the ideas James was talking about, right? So yes, it's about at our level, technology, optimization of frequency usage, consolidation of coverage, and blanket coverage, with other technologies, maybe 3G where needs be. Bear in mind, IoT doesn't have to be broadband all the time. We're not talking Netflix all the time. Environmental sensors that look at smog, that look at humidity, transmit small bits and pieces of data. You don't need broadband all the time. Sometimes narrowband is what we need. And typically, our 3G network actually achieves throughput of 15 Mbps per second, which is not bad for such a technology. So, you know, Haruna, answering your question, you know, this is our angle on it. Back to you.
Thank you, Ziad. Irene, Ziad is talking about IoT being that you need a good regulator, and from UCC's perspective, what is UCC doing to enhance this on to make sure that this expectation is met?
Thank you, Haruna. And just before I answer that, I just wanted to pick up on something Ziad pointed out, that when we look at IoTs, we need to also recognize there are different types of IoTs. So not all of them have to run on a cellular network, because we tend to look at coverage and mainly look at it in terms of the technologies that are normally obvious to us. But some IoTs, depending on, for example, if it doesn't require so much bandwidth, or it's not going to collect a lot of data, or it doesn't require, you know, very fast speeds, or because of costs, you want to maybe keep everything down, then cellular might not be the answer for you. You'd need to look at the other technologies. So that takes me to the question Haruna was talking about in terms of, from the UCC side, what do we see? Yes, we recognize connectivity is key. And we also recognize, again, the different technologies that can be used for IoTs. So in this respect, we have sought to make sure we have the relevant spectrum available to the industry, because of course, as UCC, we don't do the networks and we don't do the innovations. So ours is to create that facilitatory environment that enables the different players to innovate and invest in the relevant networks, and also create the different you know, applications for these IoTs. In this respect, we've opened up a number of bands. One of those that we looked at, especially for narrowband deployments, we had the 868 megahertz band is one of the bands that we already made available. And again, the motivation for this was to facilitate some of the technologies that are available for deployment of IoTs. We've also, of course, made sure we approach our spectrum management on a technology neutral basis. So even for those bands that we already had assigned previously based on technologies, we are transiting them to a technology neutral approach to allow the different operators to have flexibility in how they use them. James also talked about the issue of security. Security is indeed something that is very key, as Ziad also alluded to it. That is actually a key challenge. And from a consumer point of view, it's not the consumer who needs to be sensitive about the security, because many of us are dumb in quotes, dumb consumers. We look at the functionality. We don't look at the back end details of what, where, how. We think about, I want this device. So it has become very important to engage manufacturers so that this is addressed. We all recognize that many of these IoT devices are so small, and everybody's fighting to keep the intelligence and cram everything that is required into that small device. Now, the more functionalities you need, of course, that increases the intelligence that you need to include there, which makes it a challenge to keep the cost of the IoTs low, yet addressing such issues as security. Yet at the end of the day, we know that any device that connects to the internet becomes an entry point for a cyber attack or a cyber criminal. So ideally, any device that connects to the internet should have cybersecurity needs. But now when you try to do that, how do you do that and still keep the costs of these devices low? Because we've talked about affordability. The affordability is not just about the connectivity. Even that device needs to be cheap. Okay, cheap in relative ways, because if I'm going to deploy the facilities and I have to then use expensive devices, then the economics of it ceases to apply. If it's going to drain all the power that I have in the place and shoot up my umeme bills, again, the attractiveness of this reduces. So in terms of how do we keep that cost low while addressing the challenges that were spoken about, like security, these are issues that are now being discussed not just by the regulators in the region, but globally saying, and of course we recognize that as a country, Uganda, we mainly do a lot of importing. We are just starting out to be courageous to say we will develop our homegrown products. But even as we say we are importing, or even as we start building our local capacity, how do we make sure that our developers keep the issue of security on board? I'm glad to recognize that even within the industry, we now have a team, or should I say a mass that we can say is building up in terms of cyber skills. And because before we had IT professionals, engineers, and the rest, but on the cyber side, we didn't quite have expertise. But now I see a growing mass of persons who we can turn to and can be engaged by the different innovators. And I keep saying we should look at, I don't have to bring a security expert on board constantly in my organization, but more importantly, I should know where to find one when I need one, so that as I design, I bring them on board and work with them, rather than facing the challenges. Because for many of them, they are like, I don't have a cyber security person because I can't afford them. Okay. But is that an excuse now to say I am not handling cybersecurity? At minimum, let me know where to turn to when I need help. I have somebody, the same way you have somebody come around, and an auditor comes around and checks your books and checks that everything is okay. We need to get into that culture that cybersecurity is like a health check of somebody coming through and saying, you know, that window of yours needs to be closed, or that door is slightly ajar. It will give the criminals access. So I just thought I'd put that there. But yeah, Ziad already spoke about the efforts we're making in terms of increasing. Yes, I like the political way he put it of nicely. We are encouraging the operators to go out there. But yes, as a country, we would want to see that we have coverage of 100% across the country. Of course, not everything done by the operators. We recognize that even from the government side, there'll be need to intervene and complement that to be able to cover the last 10% that may remain uncovered by then. But as well, we also need to encourage and help everybody recognize there are different technologies we can use. We can use Bluetooth, we can use Ethernet, we can use all these wide area networks and local area networks, Ethernet, all these technologies. We need to keep an open mind and look at what is it you want to address? What is the functionality? What is your IoT need? Because not all of them may be the high sophisticated, high bandwidth, high speed, high reliability applications. Yes, I want a system that's reliable. What level of reliability do I need? That then explains, what's the cost I'm looking at, what's the functionality I'm looking at, so that you choose a network that suits what you want to do.
Okay. Thank you, Irene. I like your concern, and I would like to pose this question to James. Since James, you're building a data center which is going to host over 200 racks, this is a lot of storage for so many people. How are you addressing this risk of security in terms of Raxio data center, and probably maybe advise us on maybe how best we can mitigate some of these risks that are associated with IoT?
Thanks. First of all, you've undersold my data center's capacity. Thank you. We're building, obviously, for those who are not aware of our project, we're building a 400 rack tier 3 data center. And we're happy that a lot of the members here have shown an interest, and we're working out very close partnerships to try and bring things to the market. Now, I'll answer that question in two ways. In the reality of Raxio as a data center, but also in reality of the cybersecurity in general. Well, slightly on the lucky side, because we're building a co-location center. So customers will bring their own equipment, and then they will naturally secure their own equipment. So we only have to worry too much about the physical security, perimeter, biometrics, CCTV, all the nice things that come with protecting an environment, but not necessarily the data. But I think the real question here, and I see actually Nathan also threw in something that can, in the question side, that plays into big data, is the cybersecurity part is the hard part, is the part that most people find hard to address in terms of how do you protect the actual data, whether it's the actual data and the devices. So obviously there are solutions across the board, but they come at a cost depending on what your needs are. So you find enterprises who are either providing IoT applications need either firewalls in their network or some kind of perimeter security solution to be able to protect the core application itself. And if you're looking at providing IoT as a service to many customers, you have to seriously think about how you basically secure the mothership, right? I know lots of companies that run without any type of security because to an extent, security has always been seen as a nice to have. Now, with everything being exposed onto the internet, you find it's probably more essential than anything else, because if your system is out there and it's open, and then, I mean, anyone can easily walk in, well, not physically, but walk in over the internet and pick out whatever it is, and compromise your service, compromise your applications, but more so compromise your customers' data, right? To their advantage or to just simple service disruption. So there is a need, obviously, to protect the mothership. But the weak point is the edges, the edge of the network, the edge of the device where it is connected, and how do you actually protect the device itself? Can you logically do it and keep the cost low to put a small firewall in every device? Most likely not. But can you do without it? These days, almost not as well. So there is a need, of course, for the service providers, the mobile network operators, to also think about providing a value-added service to customers, especially customers who are becoming more and more sensitized about the need for security and are willing to pay slightly more to get some kind of edge security, so that you basically can now stop over and above providing just internet to the consumer, but actually also extending some security to the edge of the network, so that you start protecting these devices. Yeah, this doesn't really address each and everything that comes to the end user or the end device or the actual IoT generation point. So there is a need to now also seriously think about providing managed services to consumers. And managed services in this case is basically when you drop a router at the customer's premises, if you're a fixed service provider or a fixed wireless service provider, or even when a customer buys a MiFi, there is a small firewall that is installed on these MiFis, that is installed on the home router, where you can do a basic amount of security. For example, knowing which devices to allow onto the network, knowing what protocols to accept onto the network, and just sort of trying to protect the local side of things, so that in the event that there's an attack coming from outside that cuts across maybe the service provider's network and ends up at the end user's network, then it can be, at least a lot of them can be stopped on the router or on the final device that's distributing the internet. One thing that we're beginning to see is that it's not one device at the end of the terminal anymore. This was the case in the past, where you find you're bringing your internet home for one device. These days, it's pointless. You have to have multiple devices. And of course, the most popular network for that is Wi-Fi, right? So if you can protect the Wi-Fi network from the Wi-Fi router, that's quite a significant amount of steps ahead. Well, I guess the long and short of it is that there is no one answer that sorts out the cybersecurity conversation, but the need for the consumer to recognize the threat is very important. They need to be able to know that if I give my password to my Shamba boy, it might end up in the hands of the neighbor's Shamba boy. I know a member here on this group who has a problem where outside his home, people come and aggregate and start using Wi-Fi.
I know that person.
So you have problems like that where you have eavesdroppers. And the first step is them eavesdropping your Wi-Fi network. The next step is them hacking your Wi-Fi network. And the next step is them hacking the devices, your IoT devices. So it's understanding that there's a threat, analyzing the threat, trying to install as much security to the edge as possible, and basically keep on improving. Unfortunately, I don't think there is one answer that solves cybersecurity 100% yet, but I think there's multiple solutions to kind of get closer. I don't know if this addresses the question.
Thank you, James. Ziad, James has talked about security extensively, and could you probably enlighten us more on other risks that could be associated with IoT, apart from cybersecurity?
Look, I share the views of the panel on security, and it's really about, security and privacy. There are the two different sides of the same coin, if you like, right? So yes, cybersecurity, privacy, we're talking about the cost of these issues, the cost of security, but imagine the cost of lacking security. It is many, many times higher than what you would put in place upfront to secure your network. Frankly speaking, Haruna, I cannot think about other, the threats you spoke about, right?
Yes.
Risks.
Yeah.
No, I think the risk is to underestimate. If you want me to take it from a strategical point of view, high level point of view, underestimate the requirements we need to put in place early enough to face the massive deployment that we will be needing soon, if you like. When people like KCCA, the regulator, the operators talk about the future, we talk about the smart cities. I understand that Kampala, for example, is one of 21 cities that have been selected across Africa to be a smart city. So I think the risk, the threat is, what are we doing today in terms of preparing this future? And I think sometimes, economies play here, and people push to the back and to later the investment program we need to do, and then it might become a little bit too late, if you like. So I think awareness of what needs to be done is a risk, is a threat you want to take into account. But I was wondering if I can share a picture. Is it possible to share a picture on Zoom? And
yes,
we don't use Zoom for security reasons.
A co-host.
Yeah. Can I just share one picture with you? It's actually a study about how long it would take a hacker to hack your Wi-Fi your Wi-Fi password, right? And whether your password is a set of numbers only, lowercase letter, a more complicated password. And you will see that in the majority of the cases, hackers can access your Wi-Fi instantly, and the complicated passwords we think we use usually require a few seconds for I wouldn't say a sophisticated hacker to go in. It's a very interesting compilation of, the complexity of a password and how long it takes to crack it. And I think everybody will be interested in. I will be sending this to Anne, and I hope Anne will share it. So just to close on the subject, Haruna, and apologies for the lost time. Yes, I think we need to be aware of what complexity is lying ahead. We spoke about the network. Yes, it is not all broadband. There are many frequencies that can be used. Low band frequencies enable operators to spread widely, so you lower the risk of missing geographical areas. But typically, I have frankly nothing else to add to this subject. So sorry for being
all right. Yeah. Thank you very much for the contribution. Irene, I want to direct this question to you. With the recent increase in license operator fees, government has been since seen as the major hindrance to operation of ISPs attempting to suffocate business. How best has this position been harmonized, or how best are you trying to harmonize this too so that they can work together?
Thank you, Haruna. Very interesting perspective or question there. In terms of, we think the approach that was taken where it's a levy of your gross looks at recognizing that not everybody is operating at the same level. So rather than having a uniform fee that maybe disadvantages the ones who are not doing as well as the bigger ones, we thought that was more in respect of facilitating the various ISPs. We also, of course, continue to look out for what are the other issues or what are the other barriers to entry and what are the other hindrances to maybe expansion and competition, healthy competition in the market, and continuously seek to address this through various regulatory interventions. I believe that's what I could say for now.
Thank you very much, Irene. Now, I think we're about to wind up. I just have one question for probably James. I'm not a person who usually jumps to technology, or I rather solve a problem rather than think. I rather make sure I look at the problem and find a solution to it. What piece of advice for a business leader who's looking at, who's interested in IoT would you give?
Well, it depends on the question. Is it advice to make money now, or where is this opportunity, or like be specific? I don't talk to you tomorrow. I don't want to talk to you tomorrow. That's because it's an exciting question. Mm-hmm. Well, I think the opportunity in the fourth industrial revolution, and I want to keep referring to it because I think this is where we are, is actually across the board, right? Mm-hmm. And just not to throw in too many more technical lessons and bore the hell out of other people, yes. Is let's use the same old four facets I talked about. If you look at the cloud computing side of things, there is not too many players who are doing anything in here, right? Okay. And yet we know it can't be avoided, which is why we find data centers as an exciting investment for us. Because cloud computing requires data centers, and data centers are useless without cloud computing, right? Now, when you move further ahead and look at the connectivity element, cloud computing without connectivity is also kind of useless. Data centers without connectivity also kind of useless. So meaning that the opportunity around connectivity is also still there. Yes, it requires infrastructure, and people like Ziad have locked out a significant amount of that market. So I wouldn't advise you to get into the connectivity business, but there's definitely opportunity around cloud computing. And in this case, I'm talking about infrastructure, whether as a service or infrastructure itself to drive applications, and applications and services or platforms and services. We have a country that is heavily SME. SMEs can't afford to invest in IT, but they need the services, they need the applications to run, and they need to computerize as well, because now they have realized that the world has changed with this whole COVID thing. You have to be able to sell services online, you have to be able to innovate quickly. So they need applications to run. So you find there's an opportunity around the cloud side of things, which is basically the computing side of things. Connectivity, I wouldn't really advise anyone to get in there. The current players have invested a lot and they have a significant step ahead. Yes, there might be small opportunities around access, but not that much. So maybe around there's not so much. Cybercrime, this is something we've talked about. Cybercrime, cybersecurity, two things that come along with connectivity, and they're going to become more and more rampant when we become more and more valuable, right? I've been sidebarred by one of the members here who already has a cyber security solution that they would like to discuss. He's already seen the opportunity. I think sooner than later, everyone wants to look at it. Last week, I was on a call with my kids' school, and their biggest problem right now is people are hacking into their Google Classroom and hacking into their Zoom meets, and of course, posting undesirable pictures for the children. So you find that schools need cybersecurity, the homes need it, So there's a huge opportunity around cybersecurity, right? And maybe finally, what I would say is another area that requires cybersecurity, that has a huge opportunity is big data and big data analytics. The reason is that hardly any of us are using information that we gather and generate to make business decisions or make wise personal decisions. If you can come up with some kind of analytical solution to tell a restaurant what time of the day they require to have more staff members, when to order meat without the manager waking up and stock taking every day, or when stock is running low, whether they can use the same kind of analogy to advise the supermarket, and this cuts across all sorts of platforms, or even advising homes on when to buy things. Personally, my biggest headache is when I find a shopping list in the morning. Even if I have the cash in the pocket, I'm like, oh, things are over again. Is there somewhere this could be slightly smarter? So big data analytics obviously is also an area that can generate a significant amount of opportunity. And maybe to just wrap this up, there was a question from Nathan
Yes.
about the effects of data collection and injection of intelligence into devices and the effect it has on compliance, privacy, and personal autonomy. I think Irene is very busy trying to make sure her the Data Protection and Privacy Act is understood, is passed. I think it's very well benchmarked on GDPR. I've looked through it. It feels very comprehensive. Whether the people will understand it fully is another problem, but at least the initiative from the regulator has been taken. Now the issue comes down to how do we get the providers or suppliers of solutions to comply and align along data protection policies. Of course, it's a lot harder for the consumer to even know that there is something like this. So there's an effort that has to be taken. And it's a very good question because it has a lot of gray areas. So I think it's a joint effort between the public and private sector to make sure that these kind of policies actually are not taken advantage of and they are understood. Yeah, that's it.
All right, thanks, James. We've run out of time, and I had one question for Irene. It came from the audience. Irene, in relation in this, what's one policy change in your commission that would accelerate the benefits of IoT? That is one question from the audience. I would want to take that as the last question.
Thank you, Haruna. Which one? Because from our context, the key issues are security. We've talked about security. And I'll just take the opportunity to commend the operators. They've been working very well with our cybersecurity emergency response team, the UGSAT, in terms of addressing vulnerabilities and improving their readiness to address and to protect their users against cyber threats. In terms of coverage, again, we're working with the operators to make sure we enhance that coverage, and not just the coverage, but also the quality of service to make sure. I noticed one of my colleagues on the 4IR task force is quietly on the panel. I mean, on the Zoom session, Jackie. Sorry to unleash you. And one of the things we're looking at that, yes, we may be somewhere in terms of the data speeds, but what should be the actual minimum? Should we still talk about 4 megabits per second as our dream as a country, or should we be looking at much more than this? Both Ziad and James talked about the speed. From our point of view, it is how do we put out more spectrum bands that can facilitate more connectivity, more technologies to be deployed. I mentioned us looking at different bands rather than only focusing on the cellular, and even making sure that the available spectrum is best utilized among the operators. That's why we've also changed the licensing regime so that the available resources, we see how best they can be used by the different actors. We want, for example, to see more spectrum sharing introduced in Uganda, rather than persons only looking at exclusive use of spectrum. we're in the process of developing a framework in respect of spectrum sharing that will be coming to the various stakeholders about to engage and see how we can drive that forward. And from the cybersecurity aspect of it, we are continuing to engage with our counterparts in other countries and especially in our region. So because we see this as going to be very critical in the 5G era, where we have more and more IoT devices being driven and more automation. Possibly one of the risks we didn't quite look at, we didn't discuss. Yes, we talked about cybersecurity being the topmost, but we are a country where we're still struggling with employment, and the plus of IoT is automation, but we also have to then prepare our society for the risks that come with increased automation. How do we then skill our people to be relevant in that automated world so that they're not competing with the automation, but rather the automation is complementing our employment.
All right.
I guess I'll leave it at that for time.
Thank you,
Haruna.
Irene. And I think, yes?
Let me interject. Neraj wants to add something on security just before we wind up.
Okay, Irene, go ahead.
Hey, hi, Haruna. Sorry, guys. My name is Neeraj Gala. Thank you to all the panelists in terms of enlightening the people who have joined the call in terms of IoT and the policies. Thank you, Irene. Thank you, Ziad. Thank you, Haruna, and thank you, James. Two or three things that I would like to just put on behalf of Africell is, you know, we were discussing and the security has become the concern of our discussion today. You know, security, as we understand, is gonna be a growing concern as the IoT devices will, because they're growing in diversity and the usage of that, right? So that is one thing that will emerge as and when the more IoT devices emerge, and the new risk will always be there for us to address. So this is one thing that we all have to be watching how the industry on the IoT side is growing. Secondly, we understand, and Ziad put it very, very correctly across, that, you know, we try to save money in the beginning to see that security is not such a big concern. And at the end of the day, when something goes wrong, we realize the cost of going wrong was much higher than investing into security in the beginning itself. Now, security as a product has become a niche product in the market. We all understand that these products comes at a much higher price bands, and because of which SMEs don't have access to it. So what we have been trying to do at Africell is we are trying to commercialize the security services for our users and provide them bundled security services along with the connectivity. This is something that we can do through a cloud hosting of the services through Raxio and other partners, where the infrastructure, you don't have to invest and you do a tenant sharing on the same infrastructure with your specific rule sets. And this will bring down the cost of security significantly down. And this is what we have been working with some of our partners today. And very soon we'll be introducing some kind of security layer services that would not be heavy on the pocket, but they will get best of the security products alongside.
Yeah, thank you, Neeraj. I didn't put my sales plug into the Zoom discussion and the panel. Thank you for not forgetting it. You know, I didn't want to tell
No, it's not just the sales, but I was just realizing that, you know, as the security became one of the key topics of discussion, there has to be some people aware that, you know, we can do the security at a lower cost if we can do it through a kind of stage environment where we can have multiple tenancy on the same security platform, but one guy don't have to invest into it.
Okay. So, Ziad, do you have any ending remarks?
No, thank you, Haruna. I just want to thank you for asking me a question that took me off guard. Not many people can do this, so well done. It was a pleasure to be here today. Thank you, Irene, for your time, for your insight. James, looking forward to meeting in person and see what Raxio is doing. Raxio is very exciting for us. You know, I've been following the development of the Raxio data center since, you know, I saw the first picture on LinkedIn and the first concrete walls going up. I think this is a tremendous step forward for the country. You know, I would like to discuss, you know, cryptocurrency generation, you know, data centers across. I have a few ideas on what we can do with the, as a common solutions, Raxio and us, for securing banking data and things like that. Thank you very much for everybody around the Zoom session today for your time. At Africell, there is Niraj and myself, always happy to, you know, listen to the community and give you our insight on how we can help. Again, Anne, Mike, thank you for organizing this this evening. Thank you all.
James, you have anything, closing remarks you wanted to put across?
No, I think I've really bored everyone with my techie. Take it on. But yeah, can't wait for us to meet physically again when things come back to normal, where we can share some cocktails. So yeah, good job, guys. Keep it up.
All right. Thank you so much, Irene, for being on this call. We appreciate so much.